So number one, I've been filling the staff calendar with a number of events that I want you to be aware of. Many of you plan far ahead for your lessons and your units, so I want to make sure you know that. SBAC has been put in the calendar in terms of the date range. It's March 29th through May 5th, and we're going to be working on a schedule. One of the things that we're trying to work on is there's this concept that we're working on, which is if we can get it done more quickly this year by putting 8 rooms at a time in the CAF. We're seeing? We might try it. I will tell you, I do not have any evidence that a quiet room versus a cafeteria makes any a difference. But if you have evidence you want to share with me, I'm happy to. But we're trying to think about the concept of getting in, getting it done, and moving on. So just something to think about. Next, this is for classroom teachers specifically, and I will talk to individual people when necessary, but right now we're sort of in this phase. So getting lots of concerns from paraprofessionals that they are alone at duty a fair amount, like for the first half. And so here's what I would like you to consider. I know as a classroom teacher that sometimes you're trying to leave your room and you've got, Mrs. Willett, Mrs. Willett, Mrs. Willett, Mrs. Willett, and you're just trying to break free. I get that. So here's what I would like you to do. I think this would go a long way if you're a classroom teacher. You get to your duty. If you know you're late, acknowledge it to the paraprofessional and say, I'm sorry I'm 5 minutes late. How about at the end, you leave on time and I'll stay and wrap up. That would be a really nice thing to do on your part if you could do that. Because we all know you're pulled in a million directions, but if you find yourself getting there, not on time, just know that they feel the weight of the world on their shoulders because they feel like they have to do it. And since teachers rotate in and out every single week, they get the lion's share of making sure everything runs smoothly, whether you're there or not. So just sort of keep that in mind when you go to duty, please. The next thing regarding duty PLC coverage, we talked about this earlier in the year. It is not a guarantee. If you've asked a volunteer to come in and cover your duty, it is not a guarantee that that duty has been covered. It is incumbent upon you to check in with the main office, i.e. Denise, and say, I'm supposed to have my duty covered, do you know anything about it? She can let you know if somebody has signed up for your duty slot or if they haven't. So please do not assume that your duty is covered because you gave your name to Sean and he gave it to the volunteer coordinator and the volunteer coordinator passed it on to the family. Think about your own life. It's 20 minutes of your life that you have lots of things to do, so the chances of them forgetting it is pretty good. So just be aware of that, please. You may want to have a plan B in place if you're doing something really important during your PLC. We're going to do some quick updates with, actually not quick updates. We're going to start with Jody and Priscilla are going to take 2 minutes and talk about developmental assets. I want to remind you that developmental assets is one of the goals that we have for our students here at McKelvey. And so how we respond to students, how we interact with students, and the things we say and don't say to students send a message. And so Jody and Priscilla are going to take 2 minutes and talk to us a little bit about developmental assets.
Oh, we have 3 minutes.
3?
Yeah. 2 minutes or less.
Yeah.
And we're actually going to go over the results from last year quickly, talk about how that relates to the district mission goal, as well as what are we doing really well with and we want to continue, what maybe not so much. So just as a quick refresher, the developmental assets profile is done by a company called the Search Institute, and they have come up with 40 assets, and the idea is that the more assets a child or adolescent has, the less likely they are to engage in risky behavior, drugs, alcohol, violence, and the more likely they are to make positive life choices. What you're being handed out right now is, Jody, what do we got here? Just so everyone knows what they're looking at.
Defining each of the asset categories.
Okay, so I'm going to get to the categories in a minute. But basically what we have up here is the results of the survey that was taken in March of 2015. As you can see, we have challenged 3%, vulnerable 16%, adequate 51%, and 30% is thriving. If we relate that to our district goal, basically 81% of our youth that were tested or that participated last year scored in that adequate or thriving range. That would be considered proficient. To put into context for next year, our goal is to have 86% of students who take this survey in that adequate thriving in those two categories.
No, I kind of get one.
Since we don't have a whole lot of time to kind of get your thoughts about the general numbers, let's move on to the next one, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time if you guys have any questions. So we're going to page 5. If we can get that kind of centered. This is a breakdown. Like Jody said, the 40 assets are broken down into 8 categories, which are further broken down into these 2. So we have external assets, which are support, empowerment, boundaries and expectations, constructive use of time, and then we have our internal assets, commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity. This first box kind of shows, again, we're in that proficient, adequate range in the total assets, breaking down into internal and external, where their kids scored dead even. The mean scores for the 8 categories, it kind of breaks out. Obviously, you can see the constructive use of time was the lowest, and we're going to get into that a little bit more, into exactly what assets those are, what they look like, what we can do to maybe bring that up. The final box right here, the Search Institute also breaks those 40 down into these contexts. Personal, let's see, personal relationships, social is friendships, family is assets that are found in the home, school assets that are found in school, obviously, and then community, what access do children have to activities outside of school and outside of their kind of extracurriculars and things like that. Before we move on, are there any questions about these graphs or about our numbers in general?
I just have one. I know you said the people who took the survey. Do we know what percentage did not? Or did I just misunderstand you?
No, you didn't understand. That's a great question. We have like a 50-page report, and it's in there somewhere, I believe.
So, truth be told, at McKelvey, I think we had something like 58 or 68 students who didn't take it, and I think that's because, I don't know which classroom it was, but there was a classroom set of surveys that somehow didn't get counted, and we spent the summer trying to figure that out. But the majority of students did take it.
The majority of students. There were some that opted out, if you remember, but
Right.
again, it was the majority of students.
All right, so real quick, as you're sitting and listening to Priscilla, if you're thinking, gosh, what can I do to help raise the assets of our children? That is the second part of your handout. It not only defines what the asset categories are to give you a little more information, but there are some suggestions pulled from the Search Institute of what we can do to raise assets in our youth. Obviously, I don't have to tell you that this isn't a checkbox. Like this week, I'm going to greet students by name, and next week, I'm going to encourage students with compliments. I just want you to look down through this and think of one thing that you might try and promote in your classroom if you feel like there's an area that you want to work upon in assets. And in addition to this being a school goal, we want to get to, the 86% to help our youth on the developmental asset profile. The research behind the 40 assets and building assets in our youth really give us a clear picture over many years of studies that building assets in our youth help to promote pro-social behaviors, positive choices in kids. It really reduces risk-taking behavior, involvement in drug and alcohol, and violence. And so, not only are we helping the statistics of our school, but we're really helping to build really good foundations in our kids. So that's just, one more reason why we consider the assets and we want to promote them in our students.
If you guys have specific questions, I mean, we have this report that we got breaks down like every single question. So if you have a burning question or you just want to know, okay, well, let's social competencies, well, what is that? Just, you can come see one of us, yeah.
Do you guys have the ability to tell us how our kids did within our own classroom or?
It was all group data.
Okay.
And that's to protect the confidentiality of kids so that they would feel free to answer honestly.
We need feedback though.
The other item that we do have is, and I think these were gone out district-wide, is there's 150 ways to show kids you care. I did not pass those out, but there's a big stack here, and feel free to grab one on your way out of the meeting today. And if you don't, I'll come and give them to you.
Big thank you to Jody and Priscilla for participating in the thing when I asked them to do presentations. Two comments. The first is that this is a district-wide goal, so every school in the district is working on this. Just as an example, yesterday I walked to Lurgio to have a conference with one of Emma's teachers. As soon as I walked in, guidance department was all over me about how to develop assets among my daughter, for my daughter. You know, so it's a district-wide sort of initiative. Second thing I want to let you know is it's really about responsive classroom is so tied into this. It's sort of changing the dialogue. So you have a student in your classroom that fails a test. You can approach it, well, you know, you should have studied harder. Message received, I suck. Or you can talk to them about, okay, great try. Let's see what else we can do to help you in the future, right? So it's all about approach. I think that's really a big part of it. The other piece is it's clearly not landing fully on your shoulders. You just own a small component of it. There's much more that's owned at home, but it's something for you to be aware of, and it is a goal for us to be working on. Okay, questions about that? Okay, good. Moving on, so the reason I had invited paraprofessional staff to come if they wanted to is because our superintendent is here to speak, or was supposed to be. So I don't know what happened with the schedule, so I'm going to give you the thumbnail sketch. Clearly I'm not the superintendent, nor do I want to be, but I will let you know sort of what the deal is. So last night we had a deliberative session. The deliberative session essentially talks about the school budget. It's an opportunity for people in the town to make adjustments to that budget should they elect to do so. Last night's meeting was actually pretty conservative, went very well. It was about an hour and 15 minutes, would we say. And so here's sort of let me try to bottom line it for you, particularly if you're a person who lives in town. So there is this year a significant difference between the proposed budget, which is about $68 million, and the default budget, which is about $66 million. So that's about it's actually $2.3 million is the difference. Historically, over the past 10 years, 15 years I've been here, that number has been a couple $100,000, and sometimes the default budget has actually been higher than the proposed budget. So the school board has received tremendous pressure to make the difference between the proposed budget and the default budget. And so I don't have this down perfectly, it's just from me listening. But essentially, when you have a default budget, it's a formula that you develop as a part of the law that essentially says, you know, you just meet your commitment. So if you promise teacher raises, you got to do that. You have to pay your bills, so you have to pay your electric bill, you have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay the bond. Everything you're required to pay needs to be in that default budget. That way, if the budget fails, the district does not fold. That's the concept. The pressure the board received was this phrase that we talk about one-time expenses, right? So historically, the school district has said, every year we do roofs, every year we do paving, every year we do capital improvements. And the philosophy was to the tune of about $1.2 million each year. And so what we do is we just keep that in the budget year after year after year as a continuing expense, right? So that means last year Memorial's roof was redone to the tune of $500,000. This year, this summer, McKelvey's roof has to be done to the tune of $400,000, the part over the 6th grade. And so the board has now been convinced that those are considered one-time expenses. You only replace your roof once. You only do the parking lot once. It's not ongoing. So the board removed those from the default budget, which now made a much bigger gap between proposed and default. Okay? So the discussion was two-part last night that you need to be aware of. So those people who were in favor of the default budget essentially said, you know, you can vote for the default budget and the school district will continue to act as normally and they just won't be able to do sort of the extra stuff, right? Then the school board's position was, well, that's not exactly true. There's a technicality that it's true, but not exactly. So let me give you the prime example that came up. The prime example was, when McKelvey had this roof redone, it was a 15-year project. That particular part of the roof was only supposed to last 15 years. It is now on year 29. So the engineer told the district, it's no longer a choice. You have to replace it. It becomes a life safety issue. It must be replaced this summer. So that's to the tune of $400,000. If the default budget passes and not the proposed budget, what the school district has to do is prioritize like you would at home. If you have to replace your roof and you had a trip planned to wherever, you have to find that money. So the district's position is, we're replacing McKelvey's roof. We have to. And so if that is not in the budget because it's in the default, we are going to have to find that money somewhere, right? And where is that somewhere? Well, whatever the board decides. It could be class size, it could be new programs, it could be existing programs. So that's sort of the big deal in this year's vote, is how do you find $2.3 million? So to be clear, on the one side, the people who are saying that you need to vote the default, that encourage the default budget, there's some truth to what they're saying. The district will not fold. However, the other truth is that it's not as simple as saying they just won't get the extras. Some of those extras are, in the board's opinion, particularly McKelvey's roof, are necessary, will not go away, they will do it, and they will have to find that $400,000 somewhere else. So that's really what Chip wanted to share with you. There's some other things he wanted to share, but I don't feel comfortable sharing them yet because I don't know if he's actually going to, and so I will wait and let him share some of that information. It doesn't really impact teachers per se. There are some salary pieces he would talk about for non-union staff. That would be people like me, Kathy, the school nurse, things like that, but it would not affect the teacher's contract. All that is going. Anyone who went last night, do you have any additional comments to add or clarifications that I have brought up that maybe I wasn't clear on?
I watched him on TV, I didn't go. They were talking about the reserve funds that they had and didn't use, and it was gone by, and that was about 440,000 or 400,000 or
Yep.
something?
Yep.
And then there were people who asked, well, couldn't that be used for, like, the Kelly Road?
Yes, so that's a great question, Kathy. So Article 3 basically says the school district, like a family, has kind of savings accounts. So they have a school building capital reserve of $9,000, which they don't plan on building any more buildings anymore. The school tuition fund, $154,000, we don't tuition kids to Manchester anymore. And the school district land fund, $314,000, we don't plan on buying any land. So the school board is saying, let's take that money out of these accounts, which we're not going to use, and let's put them into a capital reserve fund. The thought being that was presented is that when the middle school, high school roof needs to be replaced, that's like a $4.2 million expenditure. So the board's position is, let's sort of save some money, put it aside so that we can help to mitigate that expense when it comes up and they're projecting 2027. Then a gentleman came up and said, is it possible that the school board could take that $478,000 out of the reserve fund, replace McKelvey's roof, therefore not impacting programs with the default budget? To which Chip responded, should all those things line up? Yes, that is possible. That was what they said. There was also another gentleman who spoke who said, why should we save $2,016 at minimal interest when we can just buy it in 2027? And so I think, here's my interpretation. I think the board is trying to say, let's try to keep the tax rate as level as we can, so let's save up so that you're not slammed all at once. And I think the proponents are saying, you're not a piggy bank. So don't save money, just ask us when you need it, and if we don't want to give it to you, we'll say no. So that's sort of the distinction. Tracy, am I getting this right?
100% right.
Yeah, I won't put you on the spot. Okay, any other questions?
Right there.
Oh, yes.
When the taxpayers get the actual voting form, will it say something on there about these are the capital improvements that are included in this increase? Like, will it be specific?
You mean like in 2027?
No, this year.
This year.
And I think what else?
Usually they say they recommend this, but it doesn't get into
No.
detail.
Okay, so that's a good question. So the ballot, and this is something I actually appreciate about the school side, because the town side doesn't always do this. The school side will say the school board recommends a yes vote, the school board recommends a no vote, or sometimes the school board doesn't take a position. So, but if you want to know specifics, it's all posted on the website. There's a preliminary budget that's been proposed. On the website, there's also a slideshow of everything that was presented. And then there's also a formula for the default budget in there too. So you can kind of take a look at that. Mike?
Historically, when the BEA or other issues have come up in the district, teachers get asked about these things, and we've been instructed, whether it's by the BEA or even by CHIP, to take a position or stay out of it. I mean, sometimes, just what's the position? If someone asks me about this, does CHIP, does the board have a thought? I mean, because parents are going to ask. Is there some sort of grassroots kind of? Because the question was, are people going to know when they vote? What are they really voting on? It's not going to say on the ballot. Are we getting this information out? Or are we just supposed to? Do you understand? Does that make sense?
I do. I think, so that's a tricky one because it's really it's personal and you're entitled to your personal opinion. So traditionally what I have said to people who have asked me is that I, as a general rule, will vote in line with what the board recommends. I've seen their work, I've watched what they do, I know how they take a look at our budgets, I know how they have taken money away from us before. I don't think that they are spend crazy. That's just my personal opinion. So if the board makes a recommendation, that's generally what I do. I think the one thing that you could say if it came up is the concept that if you vote the default budget, nothing will change is really is misinformation, because things will change. You can't take $2.3 million out of a budget and nothing change. And so from a philosophical, technical, esoteric position, that's kind of right that things shouldn't change, but the reality is things will change because the board will have priorities of what they think is important. The roof being one. It could be another example is, there's a sidewalk project on here. There's other projects that they may decide they want to do. So I just did your entire spiel.
But this would be a good question for Chip to answer. My
But this would be a great question for you to answer. So I don't know if I did it right.
I'm sure you did.
So I went over the difference between the default and the regular. I didn't talk anything about intact. We had discussion of leadership, none of that was discussed. And we talked about the questions about the warrant articles, what happened last evening, and the $2.3 billion difference and why it may not be a simple, the district runs as it typically should concept. So
Thank you.
hopefully I did it right.
I'm sure you did. I really appreciate that, and so I'm going to pick up where I think Mike left off, and to say last night was a very encouraging evening in terms of being a part of the Bedford School District, because those are big deal nights in terms of things that can happen, in terms of it's possible to have someone make a significant lowering of the budget at that evening, and it was clear that the community, in terms of that evening, was in full throat support of the work that all of you do, all of us do. So that was So I need to talk about the $2.3 million. Last night, there's basically two takes on what that means. One, Mike mentioned, which is, that's just what you need to operate without any of the new stuff. That is the concept of default budget, and that part is true. And also that, this district always has $2 or $3 million left at the end of the year anyway. And that has also been true for the last 5 years. And so the part that is not logical is to say, well, because that's what the default is supposed to mean. And because for the last 5 years there's been $2 or $3 million, which is about 3% of our overall budget remaining, you don't need to make any reductions. And that's not true. The reason that's not true is the default budget this year, they've decided to designate roofs, it's really roofs and parking lots. Roofs and parking lots are not recurring items. For years, we've said roofing happens every year. We're always roofing in the summer. That's reasonable because houses designate. Parking lots and paving, there's a lot of it. We're always paving, repaving stuff in the summer. But this year, those are out. The problem is, and I don't know if you got to this about your roof.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
The problem is that we're going to have to do your roof. And here's what the bottom line is. That means some current program will have to be removed from the budget for next year if we have the default. Another way of saying that is we got to do those capital projects. Those capital projects wouldn't be funded in the default. Therefore, we have to find something else to do without. And this is the hard part. So I've talked with all the non-union support staff. That's my office, mainly the SAU and administrators. And I said, well, that would mean none of you would get raises next year. So they've heard that. All the professional staff and BEPA and BESA there's a contract in place. Those increases are contractually obligated. They have to happen, signed and delivered. And because of that, there's no flexibility on teacher, parapro, or custodial salary next year, which means the only flexibility in terms of cost is total personnel. And I don't know whether folks know this, but typically on March 7th, which is the day before the vote, we have a board meeting. And at that meeting, I put forward all of your names, professional staff, certified staff. And I say, we want these folks next year. And the board accepts those nominations at that meeting. And that's really the legal moment when you all have a job next year because the board has accepted my nomination. Then by April 15th, usually late March, you'll get a contract, and that's where it gets solidified on an individual level. But this year, because of that big gap, I cannot, in good conscience, give the board all of those names, all of your names, the day before the vote, because that would lock the district into all that staffing allocated in the way we currently have it. And if we have to go after current programming, it would end up being random because we wouldn't know which spots would be open. And so this is the really uncomfortable part, and I'm glad Mike didn't say this because this is the part I need to say, is that that means that I can't offer you that position until we get past the vote. So we have a scheduled meeting on March 21st, a school board meeting. I intend that meeting, everything should go, if everything goes well, I'm going to put a list forward and boom, off we go. Just like we normally do 2 weeks earlier. But because of this very large gap this year, I can't lock the board into staffing as we've always done it until we know we have funding as would be required to handle that. This is probably a terrible analogy, but at least it's vivid and you'll remember it. So you know, anyone know the movie Spartacus?
Yes.
Yeah, Spartacus. So,
They don't want to admit that they've seen it.
exactly. All you need to know is that one scene, right? And so the one scene is where they're trying to figure out who Spartacus is, and everyone stands up and says, "I am Spartacus." And what that's the way I'd like to frame this is that I'm very hopeful over 26 years, according to Diane Zalonis, that we get yes votes on the budget. I am hopeful about it, but it would be a bad plan for me to commit prior to knowing. Therefore, instead of hanging any one person or one group or one program out to dry to say, this is the thing that would go away, if we get a no vote, and putting a big target on it, what I'm going to do is say, none of us are going forward. I'm not nominating administrators either. There's no one on the list because we don't know what staffing needs to look like. So who might go? Could be any of us. We don't know. We'd have to make that decision once we cross that threshold. My hope is that we don't have to. Okay? So I'll stop there and see if there's questions about that.
Can you ask your question again to him? Because I'd like
Well,
to.
I'd ask, typically in these tougher conversations, a lot of times, either from leadership or there's been somewhat of a position that teachers take, because parents often ask us, and I was just looking for guidance, what is the position, what's the response when a parent says to me, hey, what's up with this budget, and what are your thoughts on this? I usually try not to get involved in local politics, but on the other hand, I kind of want to say, yeah, people might not be here next year.
I think you can describe what I just described, which is it's up and over. The school.
Excuse the interruption. We will attempt outdoor recess this morning.
You can describe that the budget is up 3.9%, in part because of some student growth, in part because of some new programming, and in part because health insurance costs a lot. The big change is the default budget because redesignation of, I think it's best to say, roofs and parking lots, because people get that. But we need to do some of that maintenance. So that would have an impact, and this is the line I'd be comfortable with anyone using. It's going to have an impact on current programming if we have a no vote. I am confident that that is true. We would have to reduce some current programming. But the leadership team and the school board hasn't decided what that's going to be, and won't make that decision unless we have to get there. And all be reasonable, honest, truthful stuff to say. Did we say the same thing?
Actually, you gave more specifics. I just said that I have told people that I trust the board's recommendation and I always vote for them.
I like that.
Although your speech was more sobering than mine.
It is sobering. It is sobering. It's uncomfortable to say because I don't like being in this position. At the same time, is what it is, and I think judging from last night, people are willing to talk honestly about this stuff. We have a really healthy community in terms of that discussion, and I just want to make sure these groups know what our circumstances are and can speak to it, and particularly residents can act accordingly. If you have other questions.
Excuse the interruption. We need duty teachers, please.
Okay, great. Thank thank you. So we're gonna do a couple of updates. Where's Susan?
Right here.
Yearbook?
Yep, we want you folks to please talk up the sales. Everything's on the website. I'm gonna send out a blurb. If you could put that on your pod announcements, that'd be helpful for us. We try to encourage the online sales as much as possible, but if you have cash and checks, cash always should go down to the office. Make sure you note that on your envelope that you did give the cash to the office and keep the students' names on your envelope. I think it's a good time to send checks down as well. I don't know what you've been doing. Have you been sending both?
I've been holding them. I just haven't been.
Okay, so the checks you've been keeping, so that we can start to tally them and deposit them. If you could send that batch down and just note that you sent it down on your envelope, which whatever way makes sense for you. Make sure you start to take some pictures of all your kids. We have the kids with cameras, but I'll be honest with you, the quality has been terrible. They just can't, they're kids. I mean, they're 10 years old. You put a camera and there's always lighting problems and blurry because they move and all of that. So if you could just, take a bunch of photos, even if you just take small groups of, okay, let's just do 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5. As long as we have representation, we're at the point now where we need the candidates. It's not necessarily, it's not necessary to have a big, huge event, if that makes any sense.
An interruption based on the fact that I'm being told it's slippery outside. We are going to come in indoor recess.
Okay. So that would be very helpful. We kind of set a due date now that we're getting into crunch time for any photos to get in, which would be March 18th, which is World Language Week that week. So we'd like to get some of those pictures. But again, if you just start taking pictures of the kids in the pod, that's good enough. We just have representation. What's the other things, Debbie? Club photos are on the 11th. And we're going to try to make it as painless as possible, but you will have interruptions. I did see a request for the mobile apps for the district writing prompt. So I'm thinking that we might want to avoid that kind of 9 to 11-ish time slot on that morning, or just expect that the student might slip away and come back to it. The other thing, let's see. We're going to also do on that day, or any students that were new or did not go to the camera, they're not going to get a package on that day, but they're just going to have a picture made. So we'll call for those students. Hopefully we'll have a list. Denise has given me a list of new kids, and we'll figure out who we're missing, and we'll let you know via email that that particular student should come down to the camera. In relation, it's not related to yearbook. I didn't forget anything, Debbie, did I? In relation to the DAP, no, not the DAP, the writing prompt. If I would advise you open a Google Doc for that. I know a lot of people were successful. Have them type it into Google Doc and then copy it and paste it into the form. We had a lot of people who had frustrations last year in regard to that, and you're guaranteed that that won't go bye-bye if you have them do it in a document first and then copy and paste it into the Google form, because that's tricky for them, but you'll have it and you'll be able to just copy and paste their response. So that's just a suggestion I have in regard to that. Okay?
Just remind you,
Yep.
they need their quotes in.
Oh, yes, and we emailed specific people who we were still missing the quote for. The theme is be, be honest, be whatever. Whatever your favorite be quote is, the kids picked that theme. It was a little confusing.
It can be very simple, right?
It can be,
Okay, that was mine.
be awesome. I don't really care what it says, it really, just to put something underneath your name on your pod landing, on your pod page, like last year when we did your favorite inspirational quote. This one will be whatever you want underneath that. And if you could respond to that, we'd like to get those, because we can't complete those pages until we have that information. So if you could do that, that would be really helpful.
Thank you, Susan.
Yep.
Okay, so Tracy Richmond has been waiting so patiently since the beginning of the meeting to talk to us briefly about the BEF grant cycle. And so if we could just say hello to Tracy, she'll give us some information.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you for letting me come this morning. So I want to, I know last week meeting you guys had some come as well, and I've gotten a few emails, so I know a few of you have already submitted grants, and a few of you have questions, but I am actually the McKelvey liaison to the BEF board. So if you have any questions, or you want to run an idea by me, or you just think the online app is confusing, whatever you want, Chip can give you Mike can give you my direct email, and you can email me. And this year we have an unprecedented amount of money that was raised to donate to all of you. So we all worked really hard fundraising, and I really hope that McKelvey comes through with lots and lots of requests, because last year we couldn't even spend the money we had, and we have a lot more this year. So if you have something you're thinking about, it might
Hear
work.
that?
Yeah, I mean,
Can we pay for the roof?
We have $30,000 in grant money to give out this year, and we raise it to spend it. It's the only reason we do all the fundraising we do, is to give you guys grants. So if there's something out there that you think might be possible, you can run it by Mike, he's gotta sign off on it anyway, but please spend the money, that's why we raise it.
I went on the website and couldn't find the deadline for submissions.
It's March 6th.
March 6th, thank you.
March 6th. So, yes,
So I ordered lots of books through Amazon. And
okay,
they have a new Smile program as of
Yes.
last week.
okay,
So I did a search and I could find, I wanted the money, the percentage of whatever, it's for the library money.
great.
Whatever. And I was able to find the Bedford Educational Foundation.
Oh,
So
really?
what, the little things might trickle in, but I was
Oh.
excited to think, okay, potentially this could help anyone.
That's great, who knew? Wow. Yeah, obviously, all the money that is in our budget, our budget this year for grants is all donated by the parents, and community members and some of the, nonprofit organizations in town, so, we do have a great budget this year. It won't be tapped unless you guys request it, so, please email me, ask any questions, we'd love to see some really unique, great, fun ideas, or just things that you want to do for personal development. That's what the money's there for.
Mrs. Racines, to duty, please.
If you don't mind, I'm going to ask a big question that comes up to me privately a lot, but it's good that Chip is here and Tracy is here. Is the BEF supporting through grants any longer Columbia, or is that no longer on the table?
It's no longer on the table, not through BEF.
Not through BEF, okay. I get
Yes.
lots and lots of requests for that.
Okay. That comes now through the school board, right?
As much as we can fund it, because it's a district priority.
That way,
And we see all kinds of requests, so don't think anything's too silly or, I don't know, something that you don't think we would approve. You never know. So, you don't get it if you don't ask for it.
And one more time, raise your hand if you've received a grant. Jody, Sarah, Rachel, Susan, anyone else? Abby. So you can talk to those people about how challenging or not challenging it is. Great. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Good with cause?
I made my choice.
Two things. Yeah, because back at the end of the year, you'll remember, it would be good to check your battery cases maybe once a month or so, because we happen to have a teacher who totally exploded in her remote. And we were able to make it all better. No, this is good. I don't need anybody, you should have done that. This is a lesson, so I would check them once a month. Because they do, and you can't call us, okay? The other thing is on Friday, there is that super lunch in here so we can all be colleagues. So there will be no recess kids in here during all recess. Friday, both 15 minutes.
It was related to the projectors, you reminded me. Like, a couple people have asked, can I adjust my projector because I want it, to appear in a different position or what have you. Please email me in regard to that. I have Brandon do that. I don't want anybody loosening the screws on there to try to do it yourself for safety reasons, that we don't want it clocking a kid on the head. Okay, so please just let me know. I know, Mike, did Brandon come do yours? Mike Brown?
He did.
Okay, so, it might take him a couple days, but just send me a request and I'll put a ticket in for him to do that.
Yes, no power tools to be used by teachers.
Yes.
Susan.
My FCCLA kids will be around Thursday afternoon to pick up all those envelopes. Thank you so much for your patience. I have to put the order in Friday morning.
Terrific. Anyone else for good of the cause?
Bless you.
Why don't we wait on severe weather? Anyone else? Nancy?
Just a BEA moment for
2 minutes, when everyone's dismissed.
Okay? Anyone else? Okay, here's my final thoughts. Final thoughts are, we're going into the stretch before February break. So my job is to have a litmus test of teachers and parents. And so this is about the time of year where our patience get really thin with each other, with kids, with what's required of us, with all the expectations, with home. So here's what I'd like you to do. When you find yourself getting really frustrated and wanting to blow, I've had a couple of teachers talk to me about this. Just take a deep breath. You have 24 hours to respond to that email. You do not need to respond to it right away. And frankly, if you're frustrated, I would encourage you not to respond to that email. It will just cause you more problems down the road. That's number one. Number two, assume good intentions with your peers. Sometimes people don't think because they're in a rush and they have to do something. Just assume good intentions. If somebody does something that really sort of rubs you the wrong way, take a few minutes, let it go, talk to them if you need to, but just sort of be that way. The other thing is, kids and parents are in the same boat as you. They're stressed, they've got a lot on their plates, they're trying to get things done. We had someone at the main office the other day who blew because he blew. He just blew. He's like, I've been so patient with you people and you're mean. And you know, and it just and it happens. So we can make it, but I will tell you, and especially the week before February break, that is really like, Kathy's office is lit up like a Christmas tree, and teachers are crying, and parents are screaming, and it's just beautiful. Yeah. So you're doing a great job. Lots of positive things said about you in the community. Lots of positive parent feedback. I mean, and I'll be honest about this. So we've gone 9 years. Even the complaints that I get, the majority, 99.9% of them are, I'm complaining, but I really like the teacher. This has just bothered me. I mean, it's all sort of couched in, I really like them, but I need to crank about this. You know what I mean? So just be aware of that. You're doing a great job. People know it. They see the work that you're doing. I see the work that you're doing. Your peers see the work that you're doing. So keep up the good work. With that said, I need to see Curry and Sean, and I'm happy to see them